Welcome to Fast Friends, the podcast that centers on high performance storytelling with high performance athletes and individuals whose norm is to live at the very top 0.01%, whether it's competition, coaching, business, or life. We dive into their stories, how they got there, the journey, and life on the other side. I'm your host, Dan Walsh, and I'm joined by my co host, Justin Faber. Justin and I were rowing teammates in college and later on the U.S. national team. Though we went on separate journeys, since then we've come together to bring these stories to life and share perspectives with our audience as well as our guests. All right, welcome back to Fast Friends with Dan Walsh. I got my co-host Justin Faber. We got my support animals, Luke Walton and Steve Coppola. And Mettle Factory is proud to present one of my fast friends, truly one of my closest friends I made through the sport, an amazing individual, someone who I literally had on my wall to inspire me, that I now get to work together. And it's not the image you're thinking of, but Aquil,
Pause.
welcome to Fast Friends. Welcome to Fast Friends. I'm so happy to have you here, my friend. So happy. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. It's actually an honor for me to be here, with you guys. The rowing community is so strong, and I think that Fast Friends has it's perfect, because I think we were all fast friends, but we were all, fast rowers as well. So,
well, the sad news is the gray in your beard is to remind you and all of us that we're old. And maybe not everybody knows who you are. So Justin, please take it away and let the audience know who we're talking to.
Yeah, again, thank you for that setup, Dan. Really excited to introduce Aquil Abdullah, one of the, absolutely greatest guys within the sport. But just a quick bio about Aquil before we go too deep into just set up today's show. He's a bit of the renaissance man within the rowing community. Not only is he an Olympic rower, but he's also a 5-time national team member. And then some of his other quote unquote hobbies, which he's also pretty damn good at, are, things like being an author of a book called A Perfect Balance, surfing, being a musician, seen with Special Sauce. He's a model, he's a poet, he's a freestyler, he's an announcer, he's a hydro row YouTube star, he's an activist, he's an NRF board member. He's also a Diamond Sculls champion. He's a Pan Am silver medalist. He's also a Henley steward. And then I think, importantly, he would probably say on top of that list is he's a husband and a father. So, amazing resume. We have incredible backgrounds that come onto this show. Aquil, yours is definitely the most well-rounded of the bunch. But we are pumped to have you on, and I hope we can talk about all this kind of stuff because this isn't just a rowing show, right? This is a show about people, human, high performance, and then obviously, like we started the show with the friendships that are made through the sport. So yeah, psyched to have you on, and I'll flip back to Dan, and we'll get rolling.
Thanks, Justin. So, did we miss anything?
Yeah.
It's good.
Okay.
I'm gonna catch so much smoke for that.
That's not the intent.
It's good. And whatever you said is good. It's all good.
Okay.
So, your athletic background is amazing because you're one of the athletes that were an athlete in many, many different sports. And, you and I talk about playing football and how you played football. And, the title of the show is Fast Friends. So I'd love to know kind of why do you think you're here? Like, what do you think got you to this moment to be on this show?
Wow, you're going deep fast. No, I think
do you want to talk about throwing daggers?
No, that's okay.
Okay. Good. All right. Then
I think what got me here to this moment right now is curiosity. And I think that for me, my life has been filled with curious, incidents. And what I mean by that is whether it's from, as a kid, I took apart a TV while my parents were out and tried to put it back together and exploded when they tried to turn it back on. But as a, and then turning that over to to athletics, it's always been a question of how can I perform better? How can I optimize my performance and sort of, you know, how can I become the best individual that I can be? And I think that that is both on the water and off the water. And if I look around the screen here, I see people that are curious and that have committed themselves to being the best human beings they can be and best athletes they can be. And so I think that that's the reason that I'm here right now. And also because you asked me.
That is true. That is true. Um, you know, the the interesting thing that we found talking to our fellow athletes at this level, and as it's kind of seeing what you've done in the sport, you I remember really like seeing you come up pushing into that single sculling position in 2000.
Yeah.
And sculling I had known about a little bit as a young athlete, and I don't know how much sculling experience the rest of the cohort has, but it was difficult in the 90s to look up to sculling. And I think it was amazing because sculling was what really inspired me with the 96 quad. Seeing those guys come home with that medal in 96 in Atlanta at home games. And I think I really admired you because you were going after it in this part of rowing where you really bet on you.
Yeah.
And can you tell the group here, because I don't know how well everyone knows it, but like, what was it like for you coming up through the system, then that from that 96 to 2000 with, heavy hitters like Coven and Holbein and Sean Hall and Porter, like all those dudes that, again, also on my wall and also not in the image you think, but just really looking up to you guys. But the fact that you were kind of pursuing the single really impressed me because it can be lonely in that boat. And so what were some of the ways you kind of persevered in, as we say, like, how did you get through the grind of it?
Yeah, well, I think that thank you for that, but I think that my path wasn't that noble in the sense that the the single was my opportunity. I went to George Washington University. I didn't have a big erg early on, so I went to a development camp one year, and I think it was Georgetown coach at the time, Tony Johnson, said to me, "Hey, we've got some good guys coming from Harvard and and Wisconsin and and Cal. It's going to be tough. Well, so why don't you try sculling?" And I was like, "All right, well, if that's what I got to do, that's what I got to do." And so just as a note, I made both the 8 and I sculled as well. So I think that that was, for me, sculling was the path to prove that until I got my erg where it needed to be, that I could move a boat. So not coming from a big program, the single was my ticket. And so I was out there just grinding every day until, I could be as fast as possible.
That's awesome.
And
Yeah.
then just to, I know we jumped ahead a little bit, but just before we go into like you getting into the single or saying, hey, I got to establish myself as far as a boat mover goes. How did you matriculate into this sport? So this has been some really interesting fodder we've had on the show,
Yeah.
where we have people that are like, oh, I was spotted in a grocery store because I was tall, or Karen, Karen Davies, or the fact that somebody felt like they couldn't belong anywhere else. So I just didn't know, like, Dan briefly mentioned he played football.
Yeah.
Bo Hoopman was on the show. He said, hey, I was a hack golfer that walked on at Wisconsin because I walked past a piece of tape on a TV at orientation. That he was higher than. So yeah, no, all good. I just was curious how did you go from football into rowing a GW and the whole deal. Just to help us establish for the audience, when what started and then where obviously we'll take it where you went.
Right. So my timeline for rowing was really
Yeah.
compressed because
Okay, cool.
for about 3 years, I had friends. So I went to Woodrow Wilson. It's now Jackson Reed High
Yep.
School, and it was the only rowing program in Washington D.C., public or private. And I had friends who were like, "Oh, come try out rowing," and I was like, "Man, rowing's not a real sport. Get out of here. I'm not doing that."
Right. Right.
And so I think finally in my senior year, I was just like looking for, I was like, all right, you know what? I'll come out. I'll try it. I'll show you guys what athletes can do. And I went and like there was a erg and I think it was 1,000 meter test or something like that. And I went out 500 meters and then I basically just fell apart.
Yeah.
And it was like, man, that was really hard. And I think that something that we can all attest to is that we like to do hard things. Like rowers like to do hard things. And good rowers like to do hard things.
Right.
I like what you did there. I like what you did there.
Got it.
So,
Yeah.
so I was like, I was fascinated. And also, I was a wide receiver who didn't like to get hit. So, that wasn't really going to, I think, I don't know how far I would have gotten.
Sure.
And so the opportunity arose. I think that both the coaches at GW and Georgetown, Tony Johnson and Paul Wilkins at the time, saw me down at the boathouse because we shared the boathouse with those two schools. And Paul Wilkins got to me first, and he said, "Hey, how would you like a scholarship to row in college?" And I think he had seen my sort of evolution as well because, um, I was strong enough that they weren't going to put me in the novice eight. So I went to the varsity eight and they had to deal with me learning to row over a few months and really getting good. But I remember this is sort of the legend that I tell people. I'm not sure how much true. But we were out one early morning in the eight, and I had finally gotten it. I had finally like figured out how to connect. I was feeling suspension. I was taut under my arms, and they were out in this early morning light over at the Potomac. The Kennedy Center's in the background, sun's coming up, and I think like a deer was swimming across
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
it was
Uh,
like it was like that's like that moment of Zen where you're just like, this is where I'm supposed to be. And I
Got it.
think for me, it's wild to do this, to have been a part of this sport. And Wilson was pretty diverse. So, we had Black kids, Hispanic kids, Asian kids, white kids, all on the team. So, like, that's what it looked like to me. Like, when I first started rowing, I was like, yeah, this is rowing. This is cool. Um, but in that moment where I knew where I was supposed to be, it's like it is a blessing in your lifetime if
Sure.
you ever have a moment of such clarity. And for me, it was clear.
Got it. No, right
That's
on.
so cool. That's so cool.
Yeah.
That's so cool. It's also really cool to hear that that's what your first experiencing was with rowing.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
That couldn't like be more true to like part of the question, the background of the question, right, is what was your call to adventure, right?
Mhm.
Like what was your call down that pathway that you've been on for your life? And like that couldn't be more poetic if like a Hollywood scriptwriter like wrote it, so
Yeah.
that's that's great.
So
Yeah.
So you have me like imagining that scene right now too. And
Yeah, I was waiting for
it
like
is-
Lincoln to get up out of the Lincoln Memorial and start walking across the river, and like, I was like, I was like going underneath the bridge. Like, I was like, oh man, we're gonna go past the
Spider-Man.
Jefferson Memorial soon. Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Spider-Man
But,
comes down and it's like, you're in the sequel, like
But
so
no, that's amazing, and I appreciate you for giving that background, right? Because I think that what we're finding is even those that go on to a really high level within the sport, a lot of them start from a very unintentional, or even just like a really nonchalant way in.
Yeah.
Um, and then it becomes a habit, a hobby, a passion, a lifestyle, right? So I think that's
Yeah.
really important that I think we help establish. So thank you.
Serendipity. I
Yeah.
think that most rowers would say that they are rowing because of serendipity.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah, I mean, because as we're working on it, it's like trying to create more accessibility to it. But I'd love to know more because I think I know that beginning really well, and I know the getting to the national team that you were there. But it's just I would love to hear your perspective of rowing in college,
Mm.
because I think that's to your point, you had two coaches that kind of were there, and that what that recruiting process was like for you to kind of to be in this moment where you were literally a tight end and you weren't a bad tight end, you just didn't like getting hit. To okay, well, I have this other sport that's now interested in me, and now I'm going there to row. Because I think the other thing that's been interesting to me, starting to talk to our friends that walked on in college, where it was this really serendipitous, like Bo walking down this hallway, and there was a piece of tape that said you had like a jump start on that. But 1 year of rowing doesn't really change. Like you're just a little bit ahead of going into this cohort that is now looking to row in college, and maybe they thought about that for 4 straight years. So what was that transition like?
It was huge, like we had we had kids from LaSalle, Monsignor Bonner. We had some pretty decent rowers at the time. And for me, still being pretty rough around the edges, it was a pretty big transition to make, from something that I known since like Pop Warner to something that was extremely foreign, right? Like, so I go to college, and that transition is huge because now I am a scholarship student athlete, and with all of the things that come with that. And so there are, and for the first time, I'm in DC, and, most of my friends are now white because of that's my team. Like that's my team, and that's where I'm spending most of my time with these guys and girls, rowing. And so it was definitely a transition in the mindset. And to be honest, 100% honest, I failed right out of the gate. Like my first semester was athletically, I progressed, I did well. I think I was at the stroking the 2V so I didn't go to the freshman team. Instead, I went straight, like all of the guys that recruited went straight to the varsity team. So I failed like 3 classes.
And just to again for the audience, you're a physics major, I believe.
Yes.
Okay.
Exactly.
So you're figuring out fluid dynamics on the
Figuring
water,
out
and you're also
exactly. It's like
figuring out
all
physics in the
just
classroom.
like
Okay.
it's basically 2 and 3D motion, and everything. It's pretty straightforward stuff, but calculus and all those things, I just didn't know sort of how I had no idea what I was doing. But I was very fortunate in that I had a strong support group. In like there was the multicultural student center, the coaching, the athletic department, like basically after that, I sort of turned it around. Obviously my scholarship was in jeopardy. But the next season, like Dean's List, like rowing, all of that stuff had figured out. And I think that part of it was that I was out one time with my team, and pretty much all white. And then I'm walking up and I see some of my friends from DC. They're mostly black. And I had this schism of like, because I do all this code switching, right? And for those who don't know, it's that basically, whether it's a change in my vernacular, mannerisms, and just the way I communicate. And I hadn't quite figured out all of that yet. So like that was like a head explode type of moment. But what it really had me do was question who it is that I wanted to be. And I wanted to be a rower. And so in that moment, that meant that I was at George Washington University. I was studying physics. I had to make the grades to keep my scholarship if I wanted to row. And at that point, I hadn't had dreams of like going to the national team yet. Like that came probably like the summer after my freshman year.
And what was that spark? Like, you know,
Yeah.
because
So
like, you know, Dan and Steve, right, and Luke, like, you know, these guys are doing it as juniors, and you know, I'll be honest, like I tried out for the team one summer, you know, was part of the camp one summer because you know, I got a phone call from Mike, right? So that, you know, I just curious as to you saying like, yep, like that's what I want to do, or how that kind of came about.
yeah. So for me, it was that summer where I raced at Potomac Boat Club, and it
Okay.
was a development camp.
Okay,
And
got it.
all these guys who were supposed to be like, oh, you're going to ruin a quad because we've got all these good guys coming that are in an eight, and then
Got it.
sculling and making the eight and being like, those guys aren't so special. Like, you know, like,
I love it. Okay,
yeah.
cool.
So I love how one you bounce back. I think that's really important to like that's a pretty major failure, right?
Yeah.
Literally like to be said like I failed 3 classes and to say that and to feel that, you know, that's a lot, especially at 18 years old. And then you add on to it like, and thanks for sharing exactly what it was like to be in that position of code switching.
Yeah.
And feeling like that, you know, that identity, right? So from going to this, that's such a hard transition, I do think, as a junior rower. And Bo pointed this out too, where he thinks sometimes junior rowing could be a deficit, especially into your transition to going on to a national team. You know, being spoiled by making the junior team, I think helps a little bit, or even being cut from it. You get that when you're still really young, but you're hitting your young manhood.
Yeah.
You're starting to find this new sport. You're also starting to get good at it. Mike, I'm curious to think of, did this happen to you in high school with football, or did this happen in college? But when did you start to have that inner voice kind of encouraging you to say, you got this, and like, you're good at this? Like, when did you start to feel like you had this high performance mindset where you could not only, were you good at it compared to your peers, but you're like, I could be better?
Yeah, Luke, you want to fill that one?
Oh, he's episode 2, so you could go rewatch it.
Yeah, you can watch that.
It's
I
a
answered that
two-part
question
episode.
already.
He answered it at length, actually.
I actually wouldn't shut up about it. So
Yeah. I think it goes back to sort of like, you know, the why am I here? It was curiosity, you know.
Yeah.
That the transition to thinking that you know, there's this whole thing, I think, that people do things and they enjoy them. And if they're good at them, they keep doing them and they keep enjoying them, right? So, and you keep getting better. So there's this sort of knock-on effect of thinking like, I basically tell people that getting to the elite level of anything, there's a certain amount of time that you spend being delusional, right? Because you think you can do this thing that, you know, I looked up the number of people that are Olympians on the planet, and like it's something like I don't know how many zeros, but it's like one millionth, 1/10 of 1/1 millionth of a percent of people on the planet are Olympians, right? And so you think about what it takes to make it to that stage, and even the beginning of that dream is completely delusional, right? Other people may see it and like, oh, that kid's got what it takes. But for someone to see that, you know, as someone that like likes math and thinks about it, like that's ridiculous. It's absolutely insane, right? So you spend this time creating this dream, right? And you say, I can do this, right? And that's hope, right? That's hope. So like we're as human beings, we're hopeful people. But then there's also people that are there that are supporting you. And I think that it has to be that combination. There's got to be at least one person that also believes in your delusion for you to achieve. It's pretty hard when no one else believes in your delusion. So I think that going from like this point of, okay, I like this sport, to I can be good, really good, and better than all of these people around me, is just that sort of cycle of having fun. Like,
Yeah.
to be honest, like 100% honest, like I miss you guys. Like I miss you guys. Like I miss, like rowing was hard, but like what I miss most is like driving from San Diego to LA, of hanging out, watching the Tour de France while we're training, for Athens, of like hanging out in Princeton and just goofing off. Like that's what I miss, and that's what I loved. And to be honest, that's what fed my soul. Like that's what fed me, right? Yes, I love to race and I love to compete. So that transition was actually about the creation of that community that allowed me to do that thing that I felt like I was called to do, like I talked about earlier.
Gotcha.
Love you, man. I really do a lot. It's really fun though when you get into a group of people that have that same delusion.
Yeah, yeah. That's what I'm saying. Like I couldn't be around
Yeah.
regular people. I had to be around crazy people.
Yeah. I think that rings true to this day. So I think I love how you dodged the question, but I'm not going to let you get away with it. And I only say this because, again, maybe the pro of a junior rower too is like if you become the best in your team.
Yeah.
I'm very fortunate that I got a double experience that in wrestling and rowing, right? After being really bad at other sports.
Yeah.
But finding these two sports that wrestling and rowing had a very similar grind. Football has that kind of grind. Like you still played football even though you didn't like getting hit. So to me, it's like it's not from an arrogant way.
Yeah.
Because I think one of the things that you've always been amazing at, Aquil, is you lead without tearing people down.
Mm.
You really lead by bringing people in, really bringing people up. Like you are, whether you do it intentionally or it's just who you are, like people follow you because of the example you set, and you have that smile, you keep the fun in it. Like,
yeah.
And so I think I'd love to know a little bit more of like, when were there moments where you felt like you wanted to kind of quit, and that mindset or a tool kind of brought you back? Like that freshman year is one of the highlight. Like that's a really big thing to overcome.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the other part about being good at something too, is like, how do you become a champion? Like what are some of the paths and steps you took to become a champion?
Yeah.
And keep getting up.
Right. So I do want to comment on one thing, and that is sort of my view of junior rowing, and I might catch some smoke for this, but I think that it's such a tough thing because the way that I was taught to coach was that you are trying to optimize human performance, right? And that human performance is a complex system, right? And so as a coach, as a recruiting coach, you have some data, but you don't have all the data. So you have to make a decision. And so here in the US, we're saying, okay, or even abroad, we're looking at kids' ERG scores, right? And they're young. So they may grow, they may get faster later. Like there's so many things that you have to sort of like, maybe Steve, you can talk to this a little bit more about what that's like. But like, so what I find with junior rowers is, at least in the United States, where we don't have that infrastructure to sort of bring them along, like clubs, like over in Europe or in other places, is that you can get pretty burnt out, right? You train, if you want to go to college, to perform and be strong enough to get into that grind, right? And so I think that that's one of the deficits. And I don't know the answer to that, because everybody has a metric, right? Coaches have a metric. They need to win. And so I don't know. I think that's one of the hardest things you can do is to recruit a junior rower to your team as a college coach, because it's just hard. And what tears me apart is when, I know people like Luke who think about like optimizing human performance, right? So it looks at it as a complex system. You can't fix one thing without something else atrophy, and then the whole thing can fall over. So how do we create a system um where we think of the whole? And so then if you talk about, for me, coming in against guys who had rode at prep schools in Philly, um, you know, for me, the point that I got to when I thought I could beat them, and where I knew oh, I can take these guys and at least move up at GW into the top boat, was just, I was tough. Like, I don't know why. I was curious. I wanted to push myself. I like to do hard things. And so I think for me in my head, that delusion was already there. And maybe it wasn't a delusion. Maybe it was the curiosity that I just like, oh, this is hard. Like, how far can I go?
Yeah. I mean, I love how you're using the word curiosity, right?
Yeah.
Like, and something like that has really been prevalent through the other stories that we've told, and I'm hearing it in your story too, is like this mastery focus, right? And I think that's what we have an issue with on the junior level, which we've had other discussions about elsewhere.
Yeah.
Where, and Luke's been kind of leading that, at least that discussion, at least among us, where part of that barrier, right, like that or that assumption of a coach is that you're going to continue to get better because you're going to have that mastery focus. You're going to be curious to, as Lewis Carroll would say, like, go down that rabbit hole and see where is it going to take you.
Yeah.
Right. And it's sometimes it's hard as a recruiter to, you're looking at numbers, but you don't always get the best flavor. You get a partial flavor of how oriented is someone towards, being, on that mastery track. Right. Bo, it was, I just wanted my bow ball up front. And I'm going to do everything I can. I'm going to learn it. I'm going to figure out how to be the most efficient I can be. But it was that mastery focus because he wanted his bow ball up front. For me, it was like, once Mike sat me in that 8 and I was cranking down the course, and you got a taste of what fast really is. I was like, I never want to do anything else. Right. Like going 519 down the course, you're like, oh my God.
Yeah.
Like, there's nothing better than that.
Yeah.
And then, you spend years trying to like stay there. So I think it's the mastery folk, and it's so cool, like, just to hear. And so for me, like, I'm going to hijack it a little bit. I'm so curious, like, how did you, like, I think that's like a key piece to how you got where you got. And it's like, was it always there? Like, was it fostered like by, a relative? Like, how did that curiosity, that you're talking about and weaving into your story, like, how did that, like, was it just an 8, or like, where did that come from?
Yeah, well, I think that it was, I mean, I think it was a combination of things. I think that part of one of the weirdest comments that I think compliments that I got was from one of my teammates in college's dad. His dad said, "Aquil, man, I've seen you work, and you're a plotter. You just plod along." And in some ways, I think it's sort of like, I'm like this cross between Eeyore and Tigger, or or Eeyore and Pooh, because Eeyore just is like, okay, and just keeps going, right? It's just like Eeyore is just like, all right, man, whatever. It's just like,
Yeah. It's
and
one of
I
those
have
comments that could get you like if it was delivered wrong, you'd be like,
yeah.
what do you
What
mean?
did I just say?
Yeah.
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 But then the other, like Tigger and Pooh, they're just like, hoo, like they're just like, all right, like always have that optimism. And I think that what that came from actually was my parents supporting me and my curiosity, right? Like I broke a TV and they were pissed, but they were also smart enough to ask why. And like to me, that is so important. And I have to remember it with my kids, right? Because like my kids do what I would call dumb stuff all the time, right?
Yep.
But so many times it's about what's in my head versus what's in their head, right? Like they aren't trying to be mean or anything. They're just like, oh, all of these lemons are cool. I'm going to smash them all outside and just take them all outside and step on them, just to see what happens, right? So like in that way, they're like little scientists. And you have to ask why. And I think that because of that, right? Like that's what drives. I want to know why. And it's a tough question because it changes, right? Like, why did I stop rowing? It's because that rowing wasn't the why anymore like it used to be, right? Like it just wasn't the same. I could have kept rowing, but for me, it was just like, all right. So I think that in terms of your question of where did it come from, I think part of it was probably just boom, all the genes that mixed up. That's just part of me. But I think that the other part of it is the environment where my curiosity wasn't really stifled. Now, granted, it wasn't always a question of why. Sometimes it was like, you get to your room, you're grounded, or like whatever. But, but that's, I think, part of it is that you have to believe that you can find the answer, right? So,
Damn, that's good. It's hard. It's hard to think about, kids do dumb stuff, but I've been in places with all you guys where my kids are way less dumb than us.
yeah. Well, my kids are smarter than I was. Forgot about
Yeah,
it.
yeah. It's like I miss you guys, but when the kids are all teenagers, like, do not talk to them, right?
Yeah,
Don't tell them nothing.
exactly.
Don't tell them nothing.
Yeah.
It's powerful. Like we started off like, why are you here? And I think your why is why.
Yeah.
Like, how far can you go? How far can you push? And you try to get to the spoiler alert where you stopped rowing, but dude, we left off before the Steve's question, which was beautiful. Steve is so you're a GW and you're not done yet though.
Oh yeah.
You just found your calling.
Yeah.
You're good at this. You're finding that reason that you're a plotter. You have this superpower almost that you're pushing through. And when did you first get that sniff of that next level? Like, the national team's kind of calling me.
Yeah. So that would probably be my junior or senior, maybe my senior year. I think that I had gotten my erg down to like 612 at the time. And so yeah. And actually, oddly enough, this is the story I tell, and he will deny it. Chris Korzanowski, I'm naming names here. Chris Korzanowski came to GW. He was at Georgetown, I think, to down there seeing Tony Johnson. And I walked up to him and I was like, this is before he went over back to the Netherlands and came back. He says, I said, Coach Korzanowski, so I'd like to be on the national team someday. And he goes, no, you are too small. And sort of and like that was sort of like you know. But once again, that didn't stop me. And so I think for me, one of the best, and Chris, I love Chris. Like there's stories I can tell of how he supported me, how he supported other athletes. And so this is not in any way to disparage his character. But I think one of the happiest days of my life was when he came back to the US in 2001. And, you know, I was like one of the top single scullies in the country. So,
Yeah.
but for in terms of me knowing that I could do it, it was because I had continued to improve, right? You know, it would be a few years before I got down to like 6 minutes, but you know, that I saw that growth, right? From a kid who started in high school just a few years earlier, I had seen growth. And I just loved it, man. I loved it. So I just continued to do it.
So when was your first national team camp? Like because
Yeah,
you know,
I think my so I had a rough go at it because I had this is Igor Grinko was the coach, and I had gone down, and you know um and I thought I performed well. I was probably in the top 6 scullers down in Augusta at the time. But I wasn't selected, you know. I mean, I was still there training. And I think that, you know, for me, that was, you talk about those moments of like being resilient. That was a tough time because I basically just given up everything. I was down in Augusta training, and you know, like I didn't make it. I was doing all the workouts. Man, did I get strong though. Like I tell you what, dragging coffee cans behind your boat, lifting weights like that, it was brutal. I mean, you know. But
can you take us through a training session? Because like even
yeah.
I've heard legends of Igor, and the joke is Igor wrote training programs back in the Soviet Union that athletes would only do half of, and then he got to America and he was like, "Oh, the Americans do it all." So
I know. I think that I have to believe in my head that that was true because we would have like morning steady state with like the coffee cans thrown out behind us. So it's basically like some type of like weird, like I don't know. Then we would get off and we like that was like a couple of hour or two. Then we would get off, have a break, and then we would lift weights, which was basically like, you know, bench rows, like throwing big tractor trailer tire squats until you're just basically physically and mentally fatigued. Like it was, and it's in Augusta and it's hot as
so you invented CrossFit.
yes, yes, which is why I don't do it now.
So and how many guys were in that training center? Because what was this, 90,
Yeah.
98, 99?
Yeah. So we still, you know, because like Brian Jameson from the Silver Medal Quad was still there. Chris Duffy. There were a bunch of guys down there that were still there. So it was probably like anywhere. There were like 12 guys down there, at least 12. I think even I don't remember if Jason Gales was still there, but like Brad Layton, like there were a bunch of guys that were there, and so it was wild. It was wild.
And this was crazy because the quad was a trials boat going into 2000. So
Yeah.
there was this opposing faction within the US that you
Yeah.
guys were also like, so before you could even necessarily compete on the world stage,
Yeah.
you guys had to try and focus on competing in the national stage. So it was a little bit different than it is now, where there were camp boats.
Yeah.
Like the
Yeah.
big boats were camp boats. So, well, I guess this year the quad was a trials boat again. So,
Yeah.
because that's, to me, I think it's interesting for the audience to know, and
Right.
that our system kind of does change from cycle to cycle. Like it's not always the same. And in this moment, you're training effectively in the camp that created the silver medal in 96
Yeah.
against what was kind of the first unified German boat. And it was an amazing boat.
Amazing. Yeah.
And
By the way, in the same location that the boat
and this, yeah.
won
So you're,
the silver medal.
yeah. So you're
It's the same course.
training. Yeah. Same course. So, because Justin and I went down there for a training camp. Well, no, you
Yeah,
were.
I was good.
oh,
Yeah,
you-
I
you were
was.
Tampa. Oh, you were.
No,
Yeah, and
no, I went to
and-
Augusta one year, and I was just
That's
gonna
right.
say, like, you could just row for miles, and miles, and
Yeah,
miles, and
yeah.
miles, and
So-
miles, and
s-
yeah, die in the
so
heat.
that-
Yeah.
Exactly.
So, but that it intrigues me so much because in our, Luke, mine, and Steve's era, the big boats were always camp boats, right? The pair or the single and the double are the only way to trial. So,
Yeah.
I'd love to know a little bit about that kind of tension too. Like,
Mm.
not only do you have to try and make your quad, but then there's this other quad. And was there recruiting going on between Mike and Igor at the time? Like, were they exchanging athletes? Was it kind of set? Did you guys have autonomy of where you wanted to go?
No, I think that it is always like 100%. And the 8 in the United States is viewed as the most prestigious boat to be in. And usually the guy coaching the 8 or gal, has athletes wanting to come to train with them, right? So I think that with that being sort of the framework, sculling has, and I think that this changed a bit. Sculling was never seen as sort of like, oh, the top athletes are going here, right? We have this whole thing, slight tangent here for a second. So we have gone through in this country this whole idea of camps, clubs, back and forth, distributed, together, distributed together. Like, and every time that something happens, it doesn't go, we gotta change everything, right? So we've gone, and I don't care what anybody says, but I think like, because we just blow stuff up, right? And so I think that where we stood at the time in the late 90s was that, Igor had done this thing where he had gotten these athletes. I mean, like Brian Jameson, I think, was in the 2V at Yale. Like, he had all of these guys who were, none of them were like, oh my goodness, these awesome rowers, they are awesome rowers. They won silver medals at the Olympics, but it wasn't that, like, you talk about that friction. I think that athletes that sort of were seeking the glory tried to go sweep, right? And then if they didn't make it there, then maybe they go back to their clubs and they'd scull or do whatever they could to make it onto the team. So to me, that sort of was the lay of the land. And so, as I said before, my ticket in was going as fast as possible in the single, right? Like, how do you not extend an invitation to a guy that's 4th at a singles trial or at a single speed order, right? So I had to be there. I had to be fast. Like, basically, I had to be fast in the single so that I could get the invite. Right. And so that's what it looked like in the late 90s leading up to 2000. And then things sort of changed for me, because then at that point I left Augusta and I said, who's fast in the US? And it was Jamie Coven in the single. And so I said, where's Jamie Coven? He's in Boston. So I moved to Boston. I didn't have a job. I didn't have a place to live. I didn't have a boat. I didn't have oars. I had nothing. But I knew where the fastest guy was, and I wanted to go faster. So that's sort of the transition there.
So talk to us about that, right? I think that's a really interesting inflection point.
Yeah.
Obviously, Dan and I rode in Boston, obviously, for a number of years. But so what happens? You get to Boston again. You have no boat. You have no home. You have no job. You just know that your competition is here.
Right.
And by the way, were you friends with Jamie at that time, or like, was it like, oh, I'm just gonna go mirror this guy and see if I can keep up with him up and down the Charles? Like, how did that go? Like, by the way,
no, it was just this weird dude standing on the
just this
side
weird
of the
dude.
river.
Like,
He
oh,
rode
there he
by.
is. Yeah, no, just curious.
No, so 99, was it 98? Oh, 90, I can't remember what year it was there. But I actually was, so we get to send 2 scholars to it had to have been 99, or maybe it was, but like It was 98 when I moved up here, so it was 98.
Okay.
But I moved to I'd known Jamie because we had raced.
Okay,
And,
got it.
yeah, and we raced each other, and he was the single sculler.
Right.
And so I said, "Hey, Jamie, can I come and train with you?" And he was just like, "Sure, whatever." Like I was no threat to him. And I'll tell you that when I got up here, I found a job through a company in DC that had a subsidiary up here. And so I was like, a company called Moldine doing like molecular dynamics, like whatever. But what I was really doing was napping. Uh, and they understood that. But that for me was so fundamental, right? Because we talk about this is the quintessential example of great risk, great reward, right? Like huge risk. But when I got here, I remember our first practice. When I first got here, I may have been rowing out of Cambridge until I started rowing out of Northeastern. And
Go Huskies.
yeah. And so for me, Jamie was rowing out of Riverside. So I didn't have a car. So I would ride my bike to Riverside. I would ride my bike to Northeastern, row up to meet Jamie to train. We would row wherever. And then I would row back to Northeastern. I would ride my bike to work. And then I would ride my bike back to Northeastern for an afternoon row or weights. And then I'd ride my bike to Somerville. Right.
Okay. Yep.
So like
That's a lot of bike riding. Yeah.
That's a lot of bike riding. And on top of that, when I first got here, I started with a lead of like 4 or 5 boat lengths.
Okay.
Like that was the difference in our speed. Like I may be exaggerating, but it was a lot. Like I always got a lead, and I always got the inside of the turn. Right. And so if we talk about sort of what the reward was that I kept getting better, and I didn't notice it because all of that extra rowing I was doing was that zone 2. It was just like rowing. I was just rowing. I was building that base, It was foundational. I was riding my bike, zone 2, just riding my bike. All of that stuff was just foundational, right? And so I didn't see it. I didn't see the improvements. I saw the improvements on the erg. I was getting faster. I think by that time I was down to like maybe 605. And then I come out one morning, and this is the spring. This is before, so this is through 98 through 99. And we moved down to Princeton in sort of like the spring, the winter. No, in that early winter, Jamie and I moved down to Princeton. And so, but I remember going out one morning, and we'd line up to do a piece. And by this time, we were crowding each other out. Jamie wouldn't give me the inside. We were yelling at each other. It was getting hot because, like, we go to start the race, and Jamie looks over at me, and I go to take a lead, and Jamie looks over at me and says, "Hey, what are you doing?" It's like, "Oh, I'm taking a lead." He's like, "You don't get a lead anymore." Yeah. And I was like, damn.
Right.
I hadn't seen it, but he knew that I was faster. I didn't see my leads getting shorter. But there was a day when he was like, "You don't get a lead anymore." And like that was the reward of the risk that I took.
Right.
That's
and
like,
so
that's like having King Arthur knight you, dude.
Yeah, because I was just gonna say, so
that's like
just for
having
the
King Arthur. That's like King Arthur being like, "Nah, Lancelot, chill out."
Yeah,
Yeah.
so just for the audience, again, this time frame, just so everybody's aware, like your training partner is Jamie Coven, 1998 wins Diamond Sculls at Henley. So you're trading with one of the
97 world
fastest.
champion.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So you're trading with one of the fastest single scullers in the world, right? And all of a sudden, he's telling you, obviously, like, we're starting level, right? And so I think that's obviously got to be a huge confidence boost for you. And by the way, also just to rewind for the audience again, those that are not familiar with the Charles, the steady state that you're talking about, just to go meet your your training partner rather, is about 3 miles round trip, right? It's about a mile and a half down and a mile and a half back up to Northeastern's boathouse. So, so yeah, you're getting an extra, 3 miles every time you're going on the water of steady state, or whatever you were doing during that time. So on top of the biking, so yeah, totally understanding the aerobic base. But I think that like that's a really big jump off point. I think as we start to look at national team progression, going through selection regattas, getting into the Olympics, kind of cycle of mindset. Obviously, like, Jamie's still an amazing, training partner. Jamie, I think, decides to go back into sleep rowing at some point. You could probably tell the story better than I can, based on the Wikipedia page. And then, you can kind of take it from there. I think it'd be really interesting to kind of hear how you're like, all right, again, you like doing hard things. You're just like, well, we're here. Like, let's keep pushing, So I think that's a really incredible kind of jump off point.
Yeah. So I think now I'm jumping into maybe controversial area.
That's what this show's for.
That's what this show's about. But that's when I get, so to come to Princeton, obviously I have to be invited. Like Jamie's invited, obviously. And so I was like, Mike, can I come and train in Princeton? Right. And this is Mike Tatey, the men's coach at the time. And it was an interesting conversation. And he was basically just like, the moment that I think that you aren't giving 100%, you're out of here. Which I think in some ways was just sort of, I don't know what that was, but I was like, cool, that's cool. But the one thing that I did notice, and maybe you guys know more, can talk more, like I can't remember, maybe one person, I can't remember anyone getting cut from Princeton, like being told to go home. I don't know. Can you guys like
it not like, I mean, that's a good, people got cut from boats.
Yes.
Right? People got cut from boats, and how they behaved.
Yeah.
Maybe said it all, right? Like in a certain way.
Yeah. What I would say is like, I don't remember anyone being told, no, you can't come train here. Is what I'm saying. And the reason that
even Torg, I think Torg,
it was like office space.
Yeah,
right?
well, Torg,
where it was
Torg
like,
is the best.
We fixed the glitch.
Yeah.
We fixed the glitch.
Yeah, Torgy from the men's side, and maybe even like, fast forward a little bit, Moose on the women's side down the line, but it was kind of like, these are the standards here. I'm not telling you to go home, but you better not get in the way.
Yeah.
And so you could hover around the outside, and so you weren't part of the group, and you didn't get selected or voted. But I mean, like some guys went and rode at Jim Millar's at what was it called? What did we call that place? Mlark or whatever.
Yeah,
Mlark.
Longer, but
what's that? Yeah, no longer.
No longer.
I know it's no longer. That hurt. That hurt a little bit. But yeah, I will say this about PTC. And this is it's a lot of the reasons why this show exists, is that Luke kind of made a great analogy in a certain way. I'm going to say it, Luke, unless you want to say it. It's your words, but
by all means, please.
You do a year in San Quentin, it's still a year in San Quentin.
You're still doing time. One summer in Princeton, 20 seasons in Princeton.
100%.
Justin did his year in San Quentin. Some of us had maximum sentences.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't get all the tats. I just did my time and left. And
Justin, truthfully, like, you could talk to that better than anybody. I mean, you didn't have to leave, but you did have to go back to college, and
I guess I didn't have to leave. I could have, I guess, hung out, but yeah, I mean, I had to go back to school. I had to, Aquil, I was down there between my sophomore, junior year of college. So yeah, I was like, okay, like I'm not gonna get voted. Like
Yeah.
I'm not going to Worlds next week.
Yeah.
So like what the hell am I doing here? Like, I'm from Florida originally. It's like, well, there's still part of the summer. I guess I should go home and surf and whatever, wait tables. I don't know. But I have to go back to Northeastern for the fall. So yeah, for me it was just kind of, I mean that was just my experience. Obviously, I'm a coxswain. It's a little bit different, right? It's not like, all right, we'll figure this out. I was still in school. That was also a different piece for me too, right? It wasn't like I graduated college yet. So I still had, for me, it was, hey, yeah, I have my collegiate rowing program to go back to. Um, we were coming off a really good season, so it was like looking forward to that. So that was fine. Um, yeah, but to your point, I think that yeah, you could just be around, and then maybe fall back into the fold, I guess.
I got it. No,
Yeah,
I got it because I left, Luke left, right? So I think this is the only way to explain the Princeton Training Center.
yeah,
You did not have to, once you were invited in, you did not have to leave, and it wasn't comfortable to stay all the time. But if you did leave, you did have to be invited back.
yeah, fair.
You couldn't just show back up, because like after I left, right, when I left to go train in Boston,
Yeah.
I couldn't just show back up. I had to be invited back. So I think that's a really clear distinction, and it's an
Yeah,
amazing way
very
to describe
very
it.
clear distinction. Yeah,
Right?
yeah,
Is
absolutely.
yeah. So
Yeah,
So,
because
yeah.
I'm racking my brain trying to think, was anybody like, sent home? And it was like, no, people didn't make boats, and sometimes they never came back after, the team left to go to Worlds or the Olympics.
Yeah,
The hard part was getting the invite. It's sort of like, to be considered and accepted was the difficult part.
Yeah.
And then the harder part was staying there and making it work. And so, Mike, in my situation, and I'm like racking my brain for other people, I was never asked to leave, but
Yeah.
it just became abundantly clear shortly before I left, like, this isn't working. And I think in a lot of ways, you're making a really interesting point, Akil, because I think one of the things that Mike did was just sort of allowed it to become painfully obvious. And like it was painfully obvious I shouldn't be there anymore. It wasn't working for me. Like, this is, but he allowed for me to be there as long as it took for me to figure that out. And, and then it was like, okay, well, I think I should probably go now. I think I should
I mean,
probably go.
there's no point showing up to the boathouse if like
Yeah.
all the boats leave and you're sitting on the
Yeah.
dock. Like it's kind of like obvious.
This is
But,
this is the start of the therapy session.
Yeah,
But,
right.
but going back, Akil, so
Yeah.
you're there though. Like again, just to kind of
Yeah.
keep the flow.
Yeah.
I think it's really important. Like you get down there, you kind of have the threat of like, if you lift off the gas for a second, I'm going to call you out, and it's gonna be, there's the door.
Yeah.
So, I'm imagining. I don't want to put words in your mouth. So tell us about. Okay, you're there finally.
Right.
Obviously you've been training with COVID. You're like, we already talked a little bit about it, like your why of like, all right, I could justifiably think I'm kind of fast. Like I train with Igor with coffee cans and like what have you. Survive that. But now you're there.
Yeah.
Talk us through that now if you can, just because I think it's really important as to like the ascension, and this is where I personally, just side note, this is where I started to know who you were. Is that timing matches up now for me.
Yeah.
As far as like, Akil, the single sculler. So that I'm just curious as to like where that kind of picks up for you as the next couple years play out.
Yeah, yeah. So I think that like that was pretty much it was good, because I think that summer Jamie and I basically, I went to, I think, World Cup. I went to Henley and I went to World Cup 3, I think, went to Lucerne to race. And so Jamie and I were like the two single scullers on tour, which was awesome. And I didn't do well at Henley, and I forgot, but I didn't do that great at Lucerne. But I think that I think that what that did was it set me up like I knew that I could get faster. I knew that I was doing the right thing. I knew that I was on the right path. And coming back, so that fall, leaning into 99 Worlds, um, Jamie still raced the single, and which was great because he qualified it. But like moving back, coming into 2000, he decided to switch over to sweep, and so we were now in Princeton training, um, and um, and it was just like, okay, I'm getting faster. There wasn't really anyone for me to train with, so I trained with the women's pairs. I trained with the men's pairs. I was training with all of these boats. So like once again, it's that whole idea of I'm training with boats that are faster than me, but like, and I have to keep up. I have to keep pace because once again, the moment it's noticed that I'm not giving 100% in my head, I'm gone, right? But I think wow,
That is amazing.
It's the first time. It's the first time it
we've
happened
ever
that
had
well.
that. Yeah.
so
My mind's blown too. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah. So to Dan's point, I was in this phase of I was allowed to be there because I wasn't getting in the way, right?
Yeah.
And so that's how I look at it. If I look back and say it wasn't because of all of this great talent that I had, it was I didn't get in the way and I met the minimum standard, right? But that whole time I was getting faster. And then that's leading into 2000, and it's leading into the Olympics, and it's leading into all of this hype about, uh-oh, we might have the first black male scholar going to the Olympics in Athens. I mean, sorry, not in Athens, in Sydney.
Sydney.
And, and so I'm starting to get better, and I'm starting to get a little bit of attention paid to me now. It's just like, okay, here's the workouts you're going to do. Here's who you're training with. So it's not, I'm not just pushing off the dock and just going to trying to find someone who's going to work out with me. It's like I'm now part of the team. There's potential there for me to actually be fast and go on and do well. And so that's sort of leading up to trials in 2000s for Sydney was like I was at PTC and I was actually part of the group by this point. Even though I was sculling, I was still part of the group. Resources were allocated to me. I had, and so that for me felt really good. It was like, once again, I made the right decision. I'm where I'm supposed to be. And I think that going into the Olympic trials for 2000 was like I felt fast, I felt ready, and I felt prepared. And then we know how it ended.
Oh no, we don't. I know we don't.
And now we pause for a commercial.
and before I make you go to that place, and I'm starting to realize this as we talk about this, and just kind of really, a lot of our friends are reaching out and encouraging us and asking for more. And I think that's the most beautiful thing about this so far is, our cohort is saying like, this is awesome.
Yeah.
Can I be on, or can you get this person on? And I think it's, it is a therapeutic, it is a support group.
Yeah.
We miss each other, and just, it was hard not to talk about this with like the Olympics just finished, and it's your story, but I want to keep this to like, how did it feel to get supported? Right? Like,
yeah,
like I think that I do think our support can still improve by leaps and bounds. And I'd love to just, how did it feel to been like, oh, I'm supported now?
Yeah.
And I could see it in your face. I could see it in your face because I felt it when you said those words in that moment. And it's like, I don't know. I felt like for me, that was a rocket fuel. Like it just took away one less cortisol response that I had to manage.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so this is what I tell athletes that talk to me about making going to the national team, is that there's more than one path, right? We see people go to college and then they go to camp or they get selected, but there's clubs, there's development that you can do to get to the point where you're at a high level and compete internationally. And I think for me, I had spent maybe like these 4 years trying to get good enough so that I felt like I was in the right place. I felt like people that I was getting what I deserved. It was a little bit of entitlement there. I'll admit that. Like, I'm supposed to get these things. Like, this is what's supposed to be happening to me. And, it is, I think that one of the things that we need to figure out as a country with regards to rowing is how do we make our athletes, not make them, but how do we create an environment so that they feel supported? Right? Because then once again, that goes back to my thoughts of optimizing human performance, right? You can only get the best out of people when they are in their best environment, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes that environment is hard and pushes them to the max, right? But it shouldn't be an environment that's constantly, as you said, Dan, has that cortisol level up high and always stressful.
Yeah. And I
So
would love to have a deeper conversation about this, but
Yeah.
I said it's real. I'm at the edge of my seat because I've heard this story. It's fucking epic.
yeah,
That's a quack for you, Steve. And dude, you're at Olympic trials, right? And you are the man, and you have this hype, and you have this, pressure that we all put on ourselves. Like, it's like you're not alone in this pressure of, you feel like there's weight on your shoulders. And so, man, this was an epic trials. It really was. And so
yeah,
can you please just kind of really like take us through that, like Olympian to Olympian, man, because
yeah,
it's hard. It's really hard, but
yeah,
it's amazing. It's amazing. Your story's so amazing of resiliency.
yeah. So I think maybe 2 weeks or maybe 3 weeks. It might have even been a month. I don't know, but it was probably a month um, before trials. Uh, Don Smith, who had, I'm not sure if he had been the single sculler before, but he could definitely scull, um, decided that he was leaving camp, that he was going to row the single. So he packed up and left.
And Don was in the 8 and 96, correct?
Don was in the 896, and he was either battling to be in the 8 or the straight 4, I think, for Sydney, and it just wasn't going sort of the way that he wanted. So, he decided to take his destiny into his own hands. And still up to this point, like, things are looking good for me. I still feel like I'm probably, the fastest person sculling at this point. And so comes up to trials, and time trial, I had the fastest time, and then make it through the heats all the way to the finals, and I win the first final, right? So at this point, it's a best of 3. That means you have to win 2 races in order to be selected as the representative to the country. And so in the second race, I have an asthma attack. And, I forget, I finished the race, but it wasn't good. And so this is the best of 3. And so everybody else is done racing. This is the only race on Monday. So we're on Saturday, Sunday, and now it's Monday. All the crowds mostly are gone. There's people that are there that care about the race. And so the race starts out, I get a little bit of a lead, Don pulls back. The lead in this race, according to the documentation, changed 7 times. It was a prize fight all the way down the course. And in the end, I lost by 33 hundredths of a second. And I tell people that the hardest thing that I've ever had to do was to walk down that dock after losing and look at my parents. And it wasn't, and I don't know how I would have done it. Because, I was down there, Jamie was down at the edge of the dock with me, Don was there, and Mike Tatey was there. And what Mike said to me, I think, in some ways shows part of his genius, if you will, or you can call it whatever you want to call it. But what he said to me was, Aquil, hold your head up. Those people down there still love you. And, I think that dealing with the failure of not only having everyone's expectations, because when we were doing it, to be honest, like we were doing it for ourselves, but we were also doing it for the people that were around us, for our team, for our friends, for our family. Like that's what it means to go and represent your country. It is about you, but it's also about something far greater than you. And to have all of that come crashing down in that moment was, I think, it was one of the toughest moments of my life. But I made it through it. I held my head up. I went down there. I hugged my parents, and I had no idea what was coming next. And so, but it was definitely a lot of thinking about 30, like time was just weird after that, because every time I was like, that's it. That's it. That's it. That's it. I lost. That's it. Like 3300ths of a second. And so I was basically out for like a week. I don't know, like a week. I just like disappeared, and like I don't know where I was, but I got a phone call from Mike, who said they want you to go to Henley. And I was like, who's they? He said Hart Perry just called me, and he wants you to come over and race at Henley. And had it been anyone else but Hart Perry, I don't know, RIP, if I would have gone to race. My head wasn't still completely right, but I said, all right, I'll do it. And sort of I got back into training and figuring out all the logistics to go over and race in 2000. And I'm really glad I did, because I won. I became the Diamond Skulls champion. And what that did was let me know that I wasn't done yet, that there was more to do. And so that's when, after Henley, I did a little bit of traveling, came back to Princeton. And while everyone was there training and everyone left for the Olympics, I was in there getting work in. I was like doing it. And then lo and behold, when sort of camp starts up again, Chris Korzanowski shows up. And I'm like, hey, Chris. Remember me?
Full circle, yeah.
Remember me.
By the way,
Remember me.
he will deny that story. He'll deny it. But I didn't forget it.
Oh man, dude, you are a champion.
Yeah.
Right? Sometimes champions become winners, but winners can't always be champions, right?
Yeah.
Champions always get up. And man, we're only halfway there, and like, dude, you are,
Wow.
it's again, you could ring the bell at any time, brother. You could ring the bell at any time, but you just hooked me on like, I know the trials feeling,
Yeah.
right? And it's it's interesting, and we all know loss. I think we all know loss at that level.
Yeah.
Right? It's you're right. It's even like, I mean, it's a lot of times I think about this, and even in high school, right? I think when you're really passionate and you're connected to it, I think it's just an interesting thing about this athletes, and I'm learning so much about the psychology of athletes with this kind of new imagery thing that I'm on, and your ability to imagine yourself that quickly recovering, right? Your recovery from that moment where and I just want to share this with the audience. Like, there is a questioning when you are an elite athlete at that level of like, does anyone still love me because I failed?
Yeah.
And it may be fleeting. It may be fleeting, but it's like, it is your parents and your siblings and your friends. Because on the way up, man, like there is this crazy emotional support that bolsters you up. And then there's this moment where, cause like everyone's like, you can do it, you can do it, you can do it. And then there's that fucking heart wrenching minute where like, you just don't know.
Yeah.
You just don't know if anybody loves you anymore. And for you
Yeah.
to like turn that around so fast and win the Diamond Skulls, man, in the fashion that you did, and then just go to work like it's a reason why I had your picture on my wall, dude. Like that is some real stuff, right? You are
Yeah.
you're the real deal, dude. You're a champion, and I just like I love how this elevates to the next, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
because we have Wikipedia and we have knowledge, and
Right.
like so tell us, man, how do you bounce back from that?
Yeah. Well, once again, I spoke about being delusional. And so, you know, but I think that you said something. I don't want to gloss over it. And I think that so much of what we do as athletes is in the public eye. And so much of it is about performance and like how we do. And that independent of the reality of what things are, like our value, as a result of people around us hyping us up. It's like that question of, am I still loved, is so important that people have a strong sense of self, because I definitely know that there are athletes who, once that shine is gone, it's like they don't know what to do anymore.
Yeah.
And so I think for me, once again, it's about, I was lucky to be in the environment I was in. I got the call from Hart Perry. Like, that was my call to action. It was no longer about me being sad. It was about me answering the call of someone who had done so much for the sport. Right. So it wasn't about me anymore. That's how I got over it, because it wasn't about, I didn't know how I would do or whatever, but I went because I had a debt that was owed. And that because of who he was and what he had given to the sport. Right. And so that's how I got over it, was that I got over myself. And I think that that's what you have to do.
Yeah, get over yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's beautiful, dude. It's so simple,
Yeah.
but so hard to do.
Yeah.
Um,
So that was hard. But we can keep moving.
Yeah. So yeah, no, just so I think that like incredible. I didn't know the story of the trials personally, so I'm glad you shared it in detail, which I know wasn't easy. But that said, so you go to Henley, you win, obviously super prestigious, like, and I like, was that like redemption, or was that more of just like, like I don't even know how to say it, but like I feel like it's like redemption, but I think it's also a bit like, yeah, like I know I'm fast, like I needed a stage to show it, right? Like I don't, like, not that you didn't have one before that, but like it was more of just like, hey, like don't forget about me, like to your point on like the self-worth being hung on wins or losses versus the whole spectrum of performance. So I think that's really interesting. But like, so then like you obviously have, does that give you win in your sales, or was that just like, all right, that gives me closure to the trials? Like, does that carry you through for another few years? Like, just curious.
Yeah, no, I don't think, I can say to this day that I don't have closure on that.
That's fair. All right. Yeah.
No, I moved on, but I don't have closure.
I mean,
dude, you're
fair.
breaking me this episode.
Yeah. But
Okay.
what I will say is that it gave me hope again. Like, right? Because like that's what you need. You have to have, so that I was able to get back to sort of my delusional state of thinking like I can make it to the Olympics, right?
So yeah, do you want to take us on that real quick? So
Just
you
maybe real quickly before we go
yeah,
on.
sorry, Luke.
maybe some of the audience won't understand the concept of that really does stem from our attachment to performance, our attachment to the sport, sort of how the value system that was created in us and the value system we ascribe to, how we could get to a point where, you know, Aquil and Dan are like, yeah, you know, you're wondering, do the people who support you love you anymore? You know, I think a lot of people listening would be like, well, of course your parents love you. Like, what are you talking about? But, you know, I think that perhaps it really is, because that resonates with me too. You know, I was having a conversation with a friend of mine when I was in my mid-20s trying to figure out if I was going to row anymore. And she said, you know, you have more to offer the world than your athletic performance. And I was like, what? Like, it didn't compute. It doesn't resonate. And I'm like, no, this is what I do. This is who I am. This is how I associate with people, and people associate with me. So, I don't know if it needs to be explained any more than that, or if you guys have comments beyond that. But some people listening might just be like, what are Dan and Aquil talking about? Like, of course their parents love you. Like, why would Mike need to tell Aquil, like, your parents still love you? And all of us are like, well, yeah, I'm glad Mike said that to you. And I'm glad that you were like, yeah, my parents still do love me, you know. But like, that's something we all had to go through, as ridiculous as that may sound to a lot of other people listening.
And we got to do it as Olympians and world-class athletes. And in our 20s, like, I do think back to Keel's thing about junior rowing, and I'm totally okay to take the smoke, is like, too many parents and coaches are putting that pressure on those kids, and they're at 17 and 18 and having that same identity crisis.
Yeah.
Right. Where, like, does anyone love me because this isn't working out? And like, that's got to stop. Right.
Yeah.
Like, it's like, we went into it willingly. Like,
and that goes back to what Steve was talking about earlier, and Aquil was talking about. I love the idea of serendipity and curiosity, and how that relates to mastery of a sport, how it relates to becoming a student of the sport. So that, like, I think a lot of the work that I'm trying to do, and hopefully it is coming across in the work that I do, is trying to create students of the sport. And understanding that performance is absolutely an important part of that, but foundationally, you have to have a passion, a curiosity. There has to be some serendipity. You have to enjoy it as a young person, because, as you guys all know, once you get to Princeton Training Center, like, here's your job. This is what you do. Yeah. Like, once you're in Augusta carrying, you know, cans tethered to your boat, you're sort of like, okay, this is work. I'm doing the work. So, you know, Aquil, to your point, creating longevity in youth athletes, I think, really does revolve around some of the things that you hold so dear in your conversation about what took you through. It's your curiosity. It's the serendipity. There's a certain componentry in your story, which is like, well, it wasn't if. Your delusion is, it's not if this is going to happen. It's just when. Right. And so maybe that picks us back up to where we are now, because now we're getting to the when it, you know, that delusion is now becoming real on the heels of, I won Henley. I did that thing, you know, like, I mean, which is no small feat at all.
But back to the task, because I want those 5 rings.
Yeah.
That's it, right? Back to the task. I want those 5 rings.
Yeah.
Go
ahead, Steve.
I gotta get mine in, because like, maybe it's like I'm the baby of the group, right? But
baby Steve,
Aquil, when you guys were doing that, I was just starting my rowing journey. I was a few years in, but I was just starting my rowing journey. And, you know, I guess, you know, maybe it's because I was in Buffalo and Don's from Buffalo, but like, I felt like, you know, when you guys were going through that trial, like the whole rowing world like paused to watch that. And we tuned into Row 2K. There wasn't any like YouTube or streaming. You know, there were friggin' message boards and, you know, reports, you know, Ed Hewitt's reports on Row 2K, right? Like, that was it.
Yeah.
And the whole world like stopped, and it was huge. Yeah. And it really like if you think about it, like that's, like that was like the pinnacle of people in the US paying attention to the single.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And it was definitely the high point of that. And people were like, oh, like what's gonna happen? What's gonna happen tomorrow? Like what's and I didn't, obviously I didn't have a relationship with you yet. Um, I was growing up with, Patch Cotter, who, had the relation, you and Kevin had the relationship. So maybe there was a little bit of that. So I was getting both sides that people were like, oh, there's this guy, Don, who's like a Buffalo guy. And then, oh, this guy, Aquil, and, he's been vouched for, and it's just like, you're just like, what's going to happen? And so it was on that front, like just from complete outside,
Yeah.
like you're going through this, emotional thing. But like when you do something that hard, you have the rainbow of emotions when you finish, and you like, no one knows how to process it.
Yeah.
There was this Twitter exchange this past weekend. One of the rowers I coached, won a gold medal in the GB quad.
Yeah.
And, Matt Pinzett was posting pictures on Twitter of like the range of emotions that she had like post finish line. And it was like, he's like, from the time she got out of the boat until she came over to interview us, I saw crying, I saw laughing, I saw, just everything. And your just body doesn't know how to handle that. And so, like I got to put a bow in that and just like add those two things to that, where like from a young rower, I was so inspired just about like the knockdown drag out that you guys had. And so,
Yeah, it's always wild for people like to hear like reports from people about how they, participated in that race.
It's a title fight, right? It was a
Yeah.
title fight.
yeah.
But
It
I'm
was
glad
literally
you,
two heavyweight juggernauts going at it.
yeah. But Steve, I'm glad you brought up sort of that whole range of emotions because, at the point of our physical exertion, right? Like utterly just giving it all. It is actually one of the truest moments, right? Because there's no way that we can block. There's no filters. There's all of that mentally. Like it's just like it just comes out. And it's just so amazing to see that raw human emotion. So yeah, that just popped into my head. But we can pop on to 2001. 2000, fall of
No worries.
2000, everybody returns, and Chris Korzenowski is brought in technical director or sculling coach, or I'm not sure what his title was, but it was an interesting time there for sculling because, like, I think once again, now both sculling and sweep are in the same place.
And
So
the
you're talking
lightweights
about
and the women
and lightweights and the women, right? So we had
the whole
the
squad.
whole thing, and it was glorious.
Yeah, it was awesome. It was intimidating.
It was glorious. And I think that, part of that is that, as we were talking about now, I'm in. Like we've got sculling is here. I'm part of the sculling team, I'm part of rowing team. And it was, but once again, there was still that schism that I talked about. So, still that we're focusing on the 8. Like that's the boat that has to win, right? So that's what the focus is still on. And I think that I bring it up and I'm recognizing now sort of my own sort of feelings about it is because once again, it doesn't put people where they are going to necessarily excel and do the best at, right? Like we might have people that can have some real sustainability, real longevity, but they need to row in the pair, or they need to row in the 4, or they need to row in the double, or they need to row in the single, right? But when you make that priority boat such a large boat, then you have that issue of drawing away from I think other successes, really. I wanted to say other successes. And so I might get smoked for that, but that's just sort of how I feel.
Dude, I was in it, and I agree.
Yeah.
Right. I made that seat race, and I agree with you 100%. And I'm so glad that Straight 4 showed differently.
Yeah.
So quick question for you, Keel. So you're there and you're in the system.
Yeah.
Did you, just curiosity, and I know that you're really committed to the single. I know that, you had talked about your erg,
Yeah.
being, for some people, a litmus test of how
Right.
fast you could or couldn't be, even though we know that an erg is not necessarily translated to the water always.
Right.
Did you ever have any thoughts of like, hey, and, obviously you develop a relationship with Mike, beyond just like, hey, if you let up, you're gone. By that point, like, did you ever have any thoughts of like, hey, like I might ditch the single and try to
Well, so
yeah,
that year I rode in the quad.
right.
So
But getting out of sculling, I'm saying,
yeah.
like, just
So I
going
did I think it was 2000, I can't remember if it was 2001 or 2002. It might have been 2002. Gabe Winkler and I rode in a pair. We were pair partners. And we
You
did
gotta want
well.
it.
Like, it was like
You gotta
it was
want it.
like
Got it.
we just like, I don't know why, but Mike was like, hey, why don't you guys row the pair? And like the boat just went. Like you know how
Sure.
it is. Like sometimes
Yep.
when it happens, and so I did row for a little while there. But going back to 2001, I knew there was a focus to actually have a fast quad. And so that's why I stayed in Princeton because I wanted to be in the quad.
Got it.
And so
And you were a fast quad.
yeah. And so because there was that sort of, I knew that it wasn't a priority, but I knew that that was important. I was like, all right, this is where I need to be.
All right, fair
And
enough.
so that's sort of, the rationale behind that. And so yeah. And so being there at that time was kind of wild because we had, like I said, the whole cast of characters were there. And it was one of the, I don't, what I did love about it was that it was a team. We were a team, like it was just great. We had such a good time. We enjoyed each other. We battled hard in the water, and we knew everyone wasn't going to make it, and it was heartbreaking when your friends didn't make it, but we did it right.
Yeah,
so yeah.
coming into that cohort as a bunch of like college grads.
Yeah.
Luke, Justin, myself, like,
Yeah.
I mean, Steve, it wasn't that much different in 08. It was just, but it was like the first year that every best rower in the country, and you knew at that point in time, actually, you knew that some of them at a world championships would be the best in the world.
Yeah.
Right. We had world champions throughout the system, and like with Coven in the single, and winning the, like, it was like, where's the good people going to go?
Yeah.
And it was so intimidating. And I think the part of it is being like the young guys. It's always fun. It's always interesting to like be the old guy now. But when you get drawn back into being the young guys, you guys were unrelenting, but there wasn't like hazing or anything like that. It was just kind of like, here's the standard.
Yeah.
Right. Here's the standard to participate here. And let's get you through participating, and then you can talk.
Yeah.
And it wasn't like Mike and Corzo. And again, my relationship is so complex with those two guys. Like,
I think everyone's is.
Yeah, it is. And I care, and I do care for them. And Mike's one of us. He's an Olympian, so, and he had a lot to do with the success of this men's team. And but you guys kind of were this buffer to him and Corzo, where it was like, yep, it sucks. What are you going to do about it?
Yeah.
And I really think, again, like showing to the leadership of the group and to your cohort, that was amazing to just kind of jump into. And I really looked up to you, and I looked up to that quad, you know, like, because you were a quad that was on paper hitting the same standards as the eights and the straight four. Like, I think in that time, in that moment, I would push back and say the straight four was the priority, and the pair. Now,
Yeah,
sure, to win the Olympic priority was to win the eight, but
right.
that summer,
You're right. I did. You're right. You're absolutely right. I take it back. You're right. That summer, the straight four was the priority.
right? And Jimmy Tompkins, right? One of the
Yeah.
Australia's best oarsmen ever, like has won every sweep race. Like, what has he got?
Yeah,
3
he was
gold
there that
medals.
summer, I
He
remember.
was the coach. He was one of the coaches, and
Yeah.
he coached Volpin. I see, I'm boring you with this. I get it.
No, I'm just.
I'm boring you with your life.
I got kids, man. I got kids.
Yeah.
We all do.
Yeah. And this is what it looks like, folks.
Yeah.
But yeah, what I loved about the sculling when I came in there and I knew sculling as I felt like, oh, there is this optionality,
Yeah.
right? There's this optionality where, like, if I saw it differently coming in, where it's like everybody's here, there's all these events, and on the standards and stuff, holy shit, like you can make it a lot of different ways. You just got to be good in every single one.
Yeah.
You got to be good in every single one. So, like, I'd love to hear your perspective of like that 01 team, because I think that 01 team, as we talk about, was one of the most intense Hunger Games I've ever been part of.
Yeah, man. I tell you what, it was wild. Just showing up to the boathouse, you know, it was pretty, we trained hard. And I think that, as you said, everybody knew that it was going to be tight and it was going to be hard. And I think that training that 2001 year, I should go back at some point and look at my journals, but I think for me, it was basically one of my best years, I think, mentally. You know, at that time I was now down to 603. You know, I'm closing in on 6 minutes, which is, you know, respectable. I was like all of 182 pounds though, or 80, you know, so it wasn't like that's like, you know, so I'm efficient, you know. And so I think that that year was great because I think Corzo coming back, there was a good synergy at that point between Mike and Corzo. Corzo was someone that Mike respected, and it sort of gave that balance to sort of, you know, Mike's ego. And I say that lovingly, you know, but it's true. And I'm not saying that it's not deserved, whatever, but it was that great.
Well, it's needed. It is needed.
Yeah.
It is. You want a coach to think they're the best in the world to make you the best in the world. That megalomania is there, and you're
Right.
exactly right. Corzo was a balance to that.
Yeah.
Until he wasn't. Until they start competing against each other. But that's I think the point is as that their megalomania of each other.
Yeah.
They did check and balance each other, and that's why I think even though that team didn't medal, all the boats were in the final.
Yeah. So you had that was sort of this, and it was great because like with that, then you have a bar, like everybody's in the finals, like the top finals. So you have this situation where it's just like, that's awesome. You know, like we've got 3 years to ratchet it up to the next level. Right. And so I think that it was really cool. And then I think, you know, like you said, so then I think the following year, I'm just going to jump. 2001 was awesome. I was in the quad. We came in 5th, I think, you know, and it's just like a bunch of guys, you know, first world championship in the quad. We had Henry Newsom, who I think was like out off of a boat, like in the Middle East or something like that. You know, it was like, it's like this boat just came together and found a way. We had John Lorden from Washington, who's like this big kid, like you said, just like fresh out of, fresh out of college. And so it was just like, sometimes it happens like that. It's magical and it's fast. And I think that what happened next is that I think in those situations, one of two things can happen. You can look at it and say, we're doing the right thing. How do we just like make these small tweaks to make it better? Or you can say, we're doing the right thing. Like we gotta find a way. You can have doubt, right, about what you're doing, and about your athletes, right? So I look at performance as a two-way street. It's like coaches have to trust their athletes, and athletes have to trust their coach, right?
Yeah.
And the moment that trust breaks down, that's when you're going to start to have some issues. Now, you don't have to be the best of friends, but you have to trust that this person has my best interests and like it's going to help me get fast. And so I think that for me, coming out of 2001, I was pumped. I was in the quad and I thought like, we can make some tweaks. We can get faster. This is a fast boat. But what happened was, all right, now we've got to get bigger ergs into the boat to make it go faster. And once again, this is my perception. And so seeing that, I decided I'm out. I'm going to row the single. Right. And so I think that like this, because once again, that was for me, like the joy of being in the single. It's like, I'm still in Princeton training, but it's just like, I want to row the single this year. Right. And so that was the year at Seville. I think it was 2002. And I think that like from the outside looking in at the performance of the quad that year, I was just like, man, like that boat, like, what did we do? Like I didn't understand like how we didn't continue to get better.
Yeah.
But anyway, there's a number of reasons why I think that didn't happen. One of which maybe you can call me like I shouldn't have tapped out. I should have been in there. I should have been a leader. I should have been like, I should have spoken up more to the coach and been like, this is not working. Like we got to do something and we got to do something different, And so in some ways I take that one on me. But once again, I wasn't quite there on that whole trust thing of my coach.
And look, that environment wasn't meant for that. There was an opportunity for you. Luke and I talk a lot about like in that environment, in that thing, for a lot of positives that it did for creating the intensity. It was also whack-a-mole. Like if you try to advocate for yourself or a fellow athlete, you got knocked out.
Yeah.
You got made an example of,
Yeah.
Again, for good or bad. But what I see is the other thing that happened is that schism that you talked about did come back, and it came back in full force.
Yeah.
And I think that, you going back into the single actually seemed like again, from the outside, but a example of leadership.
Yeah.
Of this doesn't seem to be going. It doesn't seem like anyone's getting a voice. So I'm going to go to the one place that there are no voices.
Choose your own destiny.
Right?
Yeah.
The finish line, right?
Yeah.
Like the water doesn't care how wet it is. The stopwatch doesn't care what I look like, what I erg is. Like on the water in the single, beat me.
Yeah.
So to me, that was more of a sign of leadership than it was a tap out. But that's, like I said, perception.
Yeah. So 2002 went into the single, race in Seville. Not my greatest before. Well, I mean, I think I was 11th or something like that. I don't remember, but still not the performance that I wanted, or had hoped for. And then I think coming back into 2002, I've told this story, but this is where I talk about the trust between the coach. I wasn't feeling great. Like I wasn't feeling like I was going to make it to 2004. And I remember I went and I sat down with Corzo, and I was just like, hey Corzo, like I just feel like I don't know what's going on. And I said, this is like, I don't think this is going to work for me this year. And of course he was like, what are you talking about? No way, bleep, bleep. I'll keep the quacks out for you. But there were a lot of quacks in there. Before we eventually got to, okay, we'll figure this out. Right. And that was the winter that I went to train with the canoe kayaking team in Lake Placid. And I cross country skied, swam, and lifted weights and did other stuff. So I had never cross country skied before. So I show up, I rent cross country skis, and our first day out, I'm on cross country skis. I didn't know that there was a classic ski and a skate ski. So all of the canoe kayakers had skate skis, and I had classic skis, and I didn't know it. And I go out and I'm out there. I'm like seeing them. Okay, so this is how you do it right here. And they like we get it in, and they were like, "Wow, you did pretty good." And I was just like, I was gassed because like my first day, I wasn't going to finish last. I was going to be with the pack. I was going to figure this whole thing out. And they like I forget. We look back. We're packing up, and they're looking at my skis, and they said, you have classic skis, right? That you're supposed to ski in the grooves." And I was like, I don't know. So of course the next day I go back to the place where I rented these skis. I was there for like a month or a month and a half. And and uh and I get skate skis. And it was so much easier. But
You're
what
actually in the right training zone at this point.
exactly.
Yeah,
It wasn't
yeah.
like I mean, I was dead after that first session and I had no idea. I was like, why can't I glide? And it's because I had fish scales on the bottom of my skis. Um, so, but that sort of helped me turn the corner, at least, in my relationship with Corzo, because I was like, okay, he didn't have to do this. Like he could have just been like, do what you got to do, man.
Yeah.
You're not tough enough. So once again, going back to that whole idea of optimizing the whole human being, putting people in places where they can succeed because you trust them, right? Like that once you start to doubt your athlete, then we get into that whole grist mill because you're like, I've got someone else that can come and take their place, right? Whereas we all need chances, right? And so I came back from that and I was like back into to great shape. I was ready and we had 2003. And this is where that trust is so important because in 2003, things weren't going well for me in the quad. And I don't know why that was, but they just weren't. And so I was going to go back into the single, but Chris asked me to stay and train for the quad. So I didn't go to singles trials and I didn't go into the quad. So I was the alternate that year. And so the year before the Olympics, I'm not in a boat, right? And so the only reason that I could do that and stay at the training center was because I knew that Chris had looked out for my best interests when I wasn't at the top of my game. And so this is where things actually get really hard because then coming back after that World Championships in Milan, which was crazy, and those are the stories we can't tell our kids.
That's and the audience only gets those when we finally have a membership tier.
There you go. And so coming back into
Just real quick, I had a wrestling match with Olaf Tufte that night after the it lasted, I don't know, half a second. That guy he's so strong. He's so strong.
Yeah.
So strong.
And for
Anyway,
the audience, Olaf Tufte is Norwegian sculler, single sculler, who is quite amazing.
2 golds, right?
Yeah,
And the
exactly.
single, a silver,
Exactly.
a couple quad appearances. Yeah. And then he owns a farm.
Yeah.
So he would
And it's
row,
like a
he would
fireman.
row, he would row and then go farm, fireman, row. Like
Yeah.
he's a badass.
So Luke losing in a second was probably him being generous.
most likely.
So
Go
so
ahead.
you go, so you're not in the boat, you're the alternate. It's coming up into 04 now.
Yeah. Yeah. So we had been training, and that's when we moved out. Correct, help me remember here, guys, because like I think that's when we went out to San Diego after.
Well,
I can't
I mean,
remember.
so yes, there's a group, the scullers and the lightweights, because the Corzo kind of took the lightweights underneath. You guys were a
Yeah.
training group. We're going out in October, right around Halloween, and that's where like the infamous slash famous Walsh and Wyatt pairs camp went out with you. So we were the only two sweep guys to go out with you guys, heavyweight sweep guys to go out with you guys at that point.
Yeah.
Luke was already in Boston trailing with Artur because they
Yeah.
rode the pair. They rode the pair in 03.
Yeah.
Steve wasn't born yet. And Justin was busy winning club races in Boston. Yeah, well, you were still winning club races in Boston, but
Yeah, true.
you had your turn in San Quentin.
Yeah, exactly.
You know? And
I didn't get shanked.
Yeah.
I just
Well, and also, and like, look, man, Chip was back. Like
Chip came back. Like
yeah,
it wasn't
yeah.
like there
There wasn't
many seats for a guy like
the Coxon seat is a tough one. There is
So
there is only one. So yeah, that was it. Princeton Training Center was really other than the heavyweight men, those guys didn't come out till January. So there was a small, you had that Chula Center to yourself from Halloween till New Year's Eve.
Yeah.
And what's, just like, again, for the audience, and also I don't remember either, what's qualified at this point, right? Because that's the whole backdrop of everything, is that the year prior, you're qualifying boats for the Olympics, but in America, you don't get the seat. You're just making sure the boat gets to represent the country. So at this point, like, what's qualified on the sculling side of things that everyone's kind of working towards?
8-4. Did the quad qualify? I don't know if it did.
I think may have. I don't remember if the quad was qualified.
I don't. I know it did. If it didn't, it did qualify because it went to the Olympics.
Yeah.
It did go to the Olympics.
Yeah. The double was qualified.
Yeah.
Okay.
A single was not.
The single was not. Yeah.
The pair was. The lightweight double was.
Thank Luke.
And the women's 8, women's pair.
Yeah.
Women's single, women's quad. Yeah. So I think almost everything qualified except for the men's single.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And,
the quad is TBD, but they wound up going through the qualifier, so they did.
Yeah.
They were in that.
So you had optionality in this going through.
Yeah. 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 And so I had been rowing in we had been doing doubles matrix to try to figure out how to make the fastest quad that year. So like leading up to Athens. And once again, it was just, I was just like kind of inconsistent, and I'd have like great performances and then I'd have terrible performances, and I had great performance, and I still never really figured out what was going on. But once again, I was rowing with Henry Newsom, and we were the bow pair of that quad from 2001. And so on paper, we should have been killing it, but we just had this up and down performance. And so much so that like we came back to Princeton after we were out in San Diego, and we were rowing, and they were making double matrix, and we were switching partners and all these things. And then it was time for a speed order. And so that's where all of the boats show up, and we race, and we just try to see who's the top, who's the fastest. Or I think they changed it to National Selection Regatta at that point. And so it's like NSR1. And so we, like, I think a week or maybe it was 2 weeks before that, 2 weeks before, Wyatt Allen, who has been training to make the 8, decides that he's not going to row the 8 and that he's going to row the double with my partner Henry. And so basically I've been thrown out of the boat because Wyatt and Henry are now going to row. And so this goes down, which is fine with me. It's like, I'll row the single. I'll race the single. That was always an option for me. So, um, so I was prepared to race the single at this NSR. And I don't know what happened, but then almost a week later, Wyatt decided he's going back into the 8. And Henry's like, hey, maybe we should row the double together. And I had mixed feelings about it, but I was like, you know what? Like, I think that works. And so we go out and we're still practicing and we line up against all the other doubles and we just smoked everybody. Like, I was like, what in the world? And then we go out and we did it again. And this is just like the week leading up to that first NSR. And I was like, I don't know what has happened, but like we just found it. We found that consistency for some reason. Like we just had that jump start. And so I went from being thrown out of the boat for a different dance partner to back in the boat with my old dance partner. And all of a sudden we had found this speed. And so from there on out, it was like, wow, we're going to do this. We won NSR. We won the first national selection regatta, which meant that we got to go to race at a World Cup. And if we finished high enough in the World Cup, we would just be named the boat automatically. And so we went to race in Munich. And I forgot where we finished. We finished like 10th, which is not good enough. So that means that we had to become a trials boat. And I remember very clearly Henry and I going in and sitting down with Mike and Corzo and having to tell them that we were going to come to Boston to train with the lightweight double, Luke and Artur, under Coach Charlie Butt. And they were just like, no, stay here. We need you in the quad, right? And so we want you two in the quad. And it was just like one of those decisions where it was hard because I felt a lot of loyalty to those guys, but I also knew that like this wasn't their Olympic dream. Like they might be able to come back and coach for many more Olympics, but this was it for me. Not that I knew that this would be my final like shot, but like this was like I had to make this one. And so we decided to come up and train up here in Boston. And I tell you, it was a tough decision and it was hard. And I think that afterwards, I'm jumping ahead here. I think, I talked with Chris and he was like, yeah, I think you made the right decision. You made the right decision for you. He says, I would like to have had you stayed, but I think you made the which once again goes back to that whole thing of like you have to have trust in the system. And by the system, I mean between the coach and the athlete, and it has to be both ways.
But you also made the right decision for me and for Artur and for the lightweight double. I mean, when we found out you guys were like, are they really? They're coming up here? Like that? Yeah. And then you guys showed up and it was like, oh yeah, because, it's very similar to what you were saying earlier. It was, Artur and I were training together. It was that was just us pushing off the dock, and we were allowed to row out of the Harvard Boathouse. And then Charlie Butt, was like, hey, who's coaching you? And we got to work with Charlie. And then we started doing pieces with the lightweight double. And it was like, okay, now we've got like this training group going on. And then you guys showed up. Yeah. And it's funny because listening to your story, your story with Jamie Coven, like we were that rabbit. It's like send off the pair, then send off the lightweight double, then send off the heavyweight double. And there's so many training sessions I look at there and think to myself, what if we didn't have that, if we didn't have that, what would trials have been for all of us? What would have trials been, for Artur and myself? So, I mean, I think you made the right decision for you, but just personally, thank you. You made the right decision for me. You guys, you and Henry, you brought that. And it's funny how you talk about 2001, because I do remember coming into 2001 and there were the established guys there. And as Dan talked about, we were all the young guys coming in, like, oh, the young, goofy, puppies trying to figure it all out. And there was that tone of like, you guys were like, hey, this is serious business. We
Yeah.
train hard here.
Yeah.
But we also like to have a lot of fun. So let's
Yeah.
go, and
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
like, it's that enjoyment and doing the hard things. And so you and Henry brought that into the group as well when we were up in Boston. And so, I mean, some of my fondest memories are of that training group, going out there, getting it done.
Yeah.
Some of my fondest memories are coming into the dock and listening to you and Henry basically being like NPR, point counterpoint on all of the current, topics of the times. You guys were always getting into it in politics and all that other stuff. I mean, so anyways, I don't want to hijack it, but yeah, I agree with Corzo. You made a great decision. Great decision.
Yeah.
So thank you.
No, I mean, I think that goes back to sort of like the magic of it all, in that like you have this situation, you have these group of guys or women training, and it really is just sort of like, we would get off the dock, like you said, we'd go to Darwin's or something, grab a sandwich, and then we come in and watch the Tour de France and fall asleep on your couch. Like, all of us, we were there, we fall asleep on the couch, we wake up, the tour's still going on, like, and then we get up and go back to practice, Um,
And that's the other thing too, is just I left that training group. I was in that training group in 02, technically.
mm,
And it takes a lot of courage, right? It takes a lot of courage to leave the camp. And I think in a lot of ways, like there's a set of rails in the camp
yeah,
that if you're on them, it's
Yeah.
great.
yeah,
If you're on the rails, it's great. It is, you are surviving the Thunderdome.
Yeah.
But when you're off those rails, it's really easy to stay in
Yeah.
and just like wait to get back on. But then there's the courage to say, nah, I'm going to bet on me.
yeah, yeah,
And man, watching you guys bet on you and like getting to Athens, like, dude, whew, like that's it. That's like, you and Henry did not have a traditional
yeah,
run, like, because like doubles trials was pretty easy for you, if I remember.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that we knew, like, by the time, like, after having trained up here for a bit, I think we did maybe one or two pieces with Adam, and I forgot who he was rowing with in the double at that time. Um, but um, but we pretty much knew that we had the speed to sort that we were getting faster, and that unless something changed substantially, then we were going to win trials.
Which is a totally different mindset from where you were 4 years ago.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, to know you're on top, right? Like, yeah,
Yeah.
to like
It was ours to lose. It was it was ours to lose in that situation. I
It's
know.
really
Jack, you want to say something? You look like you were gonna.
No, I was just gonna ask, like, there's, if you actually go back through the story arc of getting there, like, it's actually a really incredible journey, right?
Yeah.
And there's also a lot of fortitude and, the namesake of what we're talking about with Mettle, right? Like, there's certainly a lot of like perseverance to get over a lot of humps, right? And I think that and look, I think that you glossed over it, but like, you were like one guy's decision away, Wyatt's decision away from, again, like,
Yeah.
there it goes by, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's another 4 years, right? So I think that's like, that was a huge piece, obviously, that worked out. But like, just as we look forward, like, can you just take us through, like, all right, you've finally been, not finally, but like, you've been selected, you're going.
Yeah.
Again, that audacity to dream delusionally for a long time has finally come to fruition.
Yeah.
But I wanted to kind of understand, like, all right, like, now what's the mindset like going into the games of, like, all right, all those experiences have got me to this starting line now.
Yes.
Take us forward now, right?
Right.
Because I think that, like, we talk about a lot on the show, like, there's an incredible mountain to climb, and you said it probably the most eloquently anybody said it so far that we've talked to, of like the 0.00000 whatever umpteenth millionth of a percent of people that are Olympians. And then if you finite that down even more through a funnel of rowing Olympians, and then if you break that down even more into people that have, rowed in an Olympic final,
Yeah.
like you're getting to a lot of percentage 0.0s in front of that percentage number, globally.
Yeah.
But yeah, so take us into that little bit of a world, because I want to also look forward as to the now,
Right.
because I think it's really important as to the lessons you learned and kind of how you've kind of shaped, that's shaped your look forward. But at least take us through, hey, you've gotten to Athens, you are an Olympian, um, what's it like to be like, all right, like, is that a relief? Is it like, I still have this pressure, obviously there's pressure to perform. You're
Yeah.
representing, you talked about it, you're representing the entire community that supports you, right? As far as who's been brought along on the journey, those people that have, held you up, propped you up, picked you up, said, hold your head up, Mike saying, hey, hold your head up, my people love you. You're there.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, just talk us through that, man. Like, that's super awesome. Like, just talk us through that a little bit, and then we could talk a little bit about like, hey, where's Aquil now? How does that influence the today? We'll kind of go there too.
So I think that that one of the things that was really sort of clear to me was that Henry and I had no idea of how fast we could go, right? So we just, like, at least our time wise, all of the indicators kept saying that we were getting faster, right?
Sure.
So there's that impossible dream, making it to the podium of the Olympics, right?
Yeah.
And so for us, it was continuing to just try to grow that speed. So like that's all that we were focusing on, like what can we do to go faster? And I think that we had no idea, right? We finished 10th at a World Cup, but not everyone was there. What does that mean? Where do we sit? Are we just going to go? Are we going to be in the B final? And, I think throughout this time, I had a coach who once told me, it's like, show up
Yeah.
at every race until they tell you you can't race anymore. And basically that means that you're in the final, right? Like that's the last race. They say, all right, everybody's done, right? So when you're there, when you're on that line, you have that opportunity.
Sure.
And I think that what is so amazing is that we were in the semifinal to the Olympics, and I'm looking over and we can beat those guys. I know this guy. I know Nitos. I know that guy. Luke knows that guy, right? Like, and I'm just like, Henry, we got to go. We can do this, right? And so it is amazing to have been in an Olympic semifinal that was a dead heat. And so now we have to go into a 7-boat final. And there's all these what ifs. Did we give it all that day? Would it have been different if our semifinal was easier? Like you can't play that game. Like that's just not it. You show up and you're there, and it's a 7-boat final. And we did wind up beating those guys, but at least so we were 6. We finished 6. And I think that I wanted more. I wanted more. Like that's just the nature. I wanted more. I wanted to medal. I don't know if that's crazy or what. I know the guys that won, that came in second, and all the guys that came ahead of us were good, but I wanted to be better, And so I think at the end of the day, I understand where we finished given where we started. But I still, like, once you said, like, how do you process? Everybody says, oh, like, everyone meets you and they say, oh, you're an Olympian. Did you win a medal? And you're like, quack you.
Sure.
But the reality of the situation is that if you are on that starting line, then it's a possibility. And so, you asked me, had I processed losing the trials in 2000? And I say no. Have I processed not going even faster in Athens? I'll tell you no. Like it's still there. It's still like I can live with it, but I don't think that I processed it because that's not my nature, right? Like the very fact of me being where I am, it's like that's not my nature,
Sure.
Yeah.
you
I
know?
Man, that race was amazing to watch. It was amazing to be there. I mean, you and Henry just to like the Olympic finals, no joke. It really isn't.
Yeah.
And it's like I've seen a lot of them. Ours we had bad luck in the beginning and great luck at the end. Like that boat won no 04, the women's 8 medaled. But it's also like so much has to go right, even in the race itself.
Yeah.
And there are these very beautiful storybook moments, and just because it's the timing of the Olympics, like I'm in awestruck of that straight four that won gold, right?
Yeah.
But there was 40 years of straight fours that didn't have that, and like
Wow. Right?
right, and I think that like it's the interesting thing about the double the double in the Olympics that I would say is always the deepest event because you can find two good people and sculling is way more universal everywhere else and like we could spend hours, which we don't have, to go into like, well, which boat's more competitive, right? Like, but I think when you look at the double,
Yeah.
it's competitive,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? Like that, like the double is so deep because you can find two exceptional people, and you and Henry, I always just wonder, like, what if we supported you as the exceptional people we were in that system and said, no, we're just gonna like put it. So, and I know to your point, do you process it? You live with it. You don't process it, you live with it, right? Like, because that's what you do. That's the burden you get for being so great.
Yeah.
And we've talked to a lot of people now that have gold medals, multiple medals, and the common theme is like, it doesn't matter how many you have, you're going out on your shield.
Yeah.
Like the champion mindset, right? Which you have, and I think a lot of our friends have. Like, are there people that go to the Olympics just to participate? Absolutely. And I think that's commendable because you have reached something that is a pinnacle that we can go to the zeros again.
Yeah.
But there is a cohort that goes there to win, no matter how delusional it may be.
Yeah.
And you and Henry proved that, right?
Yeah.
You went there to win. You raced to win. And, there's a lot we could talk about. I want to be mindful of your time because you're giving us a lot. And like, you're always welcome back on. I have two kind of questions left. And the one that I really want to hit because of how powerful your story is I do have this theory that all of us have an edge. That is our edge. It's it's what we lean on in ourselves in those dark moments to say, if I may get beat everywhere, but I'm not getting beat here. Because in that camp, like in a PTC, you gotta have your your amulet, whatever, your magical your magical tag. I use magic. Your magical tagger. Something that is inside of you that say, this I will not get taken away from me. What was yours?
It's actually, I don't know if it sounds hokey or what, but I just always believe in my ability to endure. Like and I think that I do it independent of the outcome, right? Like I'm not, if I'm doing something, then it's not just like, okay, yeah, I want to win. Like I said, there's races that I've lost that I haven't processed completely. But in the moment, I think I have an ability to be in the moment, to be relentless. And it's interesting because if you like, most people's like, oh, Achilles so laid back. He's so, so like he's a funny guy. But like they don't know that dark place that's just like that just doesn't give up, that just is relentless, that is in the moment, and it's like right there, and it's like it's not all the time, but it's like when I call it up, it's like there, it just doesn't give up. And I think for me, that's been the edge. And I think that whether that is like I said, I think you have to be hopeful. I think you have to be like partly delusional. Maybe that's my delusion, is that like I can do it. And I think that's my edge. And I think that part of that is, if I
That's
think
a good
about it a little
edge.
bit, yeah,
It's a good
I
edge.
think if I think about it a little bit more, I think that that's what allows me to be optimistic when everything's falling apart.
Yeah, dude, that's a great edge.
Yeah.
Everyone's edge has been different, which has been cool, and that's one. That one's really like, yeah, to want to know that you have to endure past it
Yeah.
and still jump on in. Yeah, that's awesome, and you are relentless. You are.
So,
Yeah.
question number 2.
All right, this is it, baby. You have survived. We'll see where you and Luke are with. We might have to make this a 2-parter.
Yeah.
Editor
Yeah.
Steve will let us know.
Yeah.
Akil, if you could go back at any time in your athletic career
Mm.
and coach yourself with the
Mm.
knowledge you have now,
Yeah.
what time would that be in your life, and what would you say?
Wow. I think it would be it would have to be I keep going back to 2002, sort of when I made the decision to row the single. And I think that it would probably be uh to not be afraid to challenge sort of what I saw going on. And I'm not saying that what I saw going on was bad, but just that in terms of the team, I think the team could have been better if we had focused more on, you know, you know, on trying to, if we had gone a different way and trying to make the boat fast, right? If we hadn't gone just like, let's just try to throw some bigger or ergs in the boat, we can coach them to speed, right? Like as coaches, we all know that like sometimes you just get a chemistry and you can't figure it out, right? Like you don't know why. Like I have no idea why like Grant Nichols, John Lorden, Henry Newsom, and Aquil Abdullah were able to make a final in the quad. Like I have no idea why that happened, right? But I don't know. I just feel like what I would have told myself is to like I feel like I maybe failed as a leader, even though I made the decision to just walk away. But I felt like throughout my career, I've always felt that I could row the single. Like I can race the single. So like if things are going bad, I don't have to deal with it. Right. And that's not an option that every person has. And so for me, that gives me I can be a leader in that situation. And I think that I would have spoken up a little bit more about sort of the training that was going on and the approach that was being taken. I would have said do it.
Man, you basically, I mean, you would have made, of all the things you could coach yourself on, you said, I advocate more. And for a man that advocates for a lot for the sport to be better, a man I look up to, someone that I'm proud to like have earned your friendship and be a fast friend. Akil, thank you for coming on the show, man.
Thank you for having me.
Dude, you took us on an awesome wild ride. Truthfully, for me, better than I thought. I really, which is tough to say. We've gotten to speak together, we've gotten to do stuff together, and it's really fun to kind of make it about you with just a little bit of like where your influence affected us and the rowing culture. And you know, for me at the Metal Factory, I'm done. I don't know if I can take so much more amazement from you today. Because it's a lot. And thank you, man. I really love you as a friend, and thank you for being on the show. And you're welcome anytime.
All
And
right.
whatever you need from me, you know you got it.
All right. Well, real fast because Justin asked what I'm doing now. A most
Yeah.
beautiful thing.
Yes. Yeah. No. Go.
Yeah,
This
no,
is
most
I'd,
your
lo-
beautiful
I'd,
show.
I'd
thing
love to
includes
just
in
kind of
front.
hear where you're at now. And honestly, I echo Dan's sentiment. Like, thank you so much for taking us on your journey. Obviously, from wide receiver to GW to on 0.33 in 2000 to an Olympic final. It's amazing. It's an amazing arc.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'd love to hear it. I know the audience wants to hear too of, hey, like, things don't just, there's not a punctuation point, right? There's a continuum. And I'd love to hear, and I think the audience is really eager to hear too, of like, hey, what's Keel to now?
Excuse me. So I walked away from the sport for a bit. Like I was considering coming back in 2005 and 2006, but it didn't happen. But I walked away from the sport for a bit. I did a little bit of coaching here in Boston. Um, but I think then I met Arshay Cooper, and and I realized that I had a lot more to give to the sport. And so I joined the board of the Most Beautiful Thing Inclusion Fund, and we're working to bring, diversity and equity to the sport of rowing, but also go fast. Like, it's not just like, I don't want one of these kumbaya programs where rowing is great. It has so much to teach us about community and everything else. Yeah, it does, but I want to go fast. So it's about finding kids that can row. And I'm on the board of the National Rowing Foundation. Really, that's the other side of like trying to really support our athletes. We're sort of morphed into a grant giving organization now, so people can apply for grants. I'm also software developer and featured athlete on the Hydro rowing platform. And I'm just out there being an evangelist for the great things that our sport, uh, can do, and how it creates lifelong memories, lifelong friends, and just amazing opportunities.
You
That's
started off being introduced as a Renaissance man, and
awesome.
we're closing you out as a Renaissance man. You are incredible.
Thank
The
you.
infamous,
thank you, man.
famous, and honorable Aquil Abdullah. Thank you.
Namaste.
That's all for today's show. Fast Friends is a Metal Factory production. All opinions expressed are our own and those of our guests. If you like our show, follow along or subscribe with us wherever you get your content and podcasts. Thanks for listening.